Welcome everyone to this session on boosting European competitiveness through science and tech diplomacy. My name is Broeng. I'm a professor at the Technical University of Denmark. I'm mainly responsible for entrepreneurship and innovation. I'll be moderating this session and guide you through an exploration of how science and tech diplomacy can translate Europe's research strength into business impact. We'll ask industry what needs they have from science and tech diplomacy, and then we'll take a closer look at how and whether the current European approach can actually help. I should say I'm an engineer. I'm quite practical by heart, so hopefully we can also be concrete together with this great panel here. And to help us tackle these ambitious questions, it's really an excellent lineup of speakers and panelists we have. In a minute, I will welcome Sylvia Serger to the stage. Sylvia is CEO of the Swedish Royal Academy of Engineering. She is also a professor in economic history at Lund University, and you've been invited to reflect on the strategic role of science diplomacy in connection with research and business. And after Sylvia's presentation, we'll turn to our distinguished colleagues from industry. We have Jean-François van Boxmeer, Chair of the European Roundtable for Industry, Chair of Vodafone. And Jean-François has a really impressive career at Heineken, where including you served as CEO for 15 years. So we very much look forward to hearing the voice of large companies in relation to science diplomacy. Also from industry and top academia, we have Jens Nielsen. Jens is the CEO of the BioInnovation Institute, funded by the Novo Nordisk Foundation. And BII is a Danish high-impact accelerator that supports research startups to realize bold ideas. Jens has a highly impressive career, recognized as a scientist and entrepreneur. You have trained more than 280 scientists in your research group. You're the inventor of more than 50 patents and founded 6 biotech companies. So Jens will contribute with a perspective coming from startups and scale-ups. Then after industry perspective, we'll take a closer look at how science and tech diplomacy can respond to the needs of industry. And to help us unfold that question, we have Claudia Reinprecht. She is the Chief of Unit at the Austrian Ministry of European and International Affairs, and you are the focal point of Austrian digital and tech diplomacy. You have been with the Austrian Foreign Service for more than 20 years, including postings in Brussels, Amman, Hong Kong, and in Paris. Also, we have Lynda Hardman joining us. She is the chair of the COST Scientific Committee. That is a European funding body for bottom-up research and innovation networks. And you are the principal researcher at CWI, which is the Dutch National Research Center for Mathematics and Computer Science. And finally, we have Pouline Terpager. She is the Sherpa at the high-level Forum for Standardization, and you're the Director of International Policy at Danish Standards. Pouline will be sharing perspectives on how standards can support European industry and why standardization needs to be part of European approach to science and tech diplomacy. All right, with that, before we start, I would also like to welcome online participants. Thank you so much for joining us. And both of you online and in the room, we have the possibility to comment and ask questions through Slido. So there should be a QR code coming up here. And without further ado, then it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Sylvia, on stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, yes. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't see a clock, but I usually stick to my time. Otherwise, just wave. I can tell this is not my latest presentation, but it's fine. I thought I'd talk to you for about 10 minutes about navigating science diplomacy in an era where we're really navigating the dawn of a new world order. And I've spent 20 years working with international science and technology policy in addition to studying it. So here comes my reflections, perhaps a little provocative maybe to get a discussion going. So I welcome any insight, any reflections. I thought I'd start with a few what I call unhelpful simplifications when we talk about international science and technology policy or science diplomacy. The first one is what we often hear is that science is global. And in my research, one of the things that strikes you when you start studying the global science system as we have known it is that that is really a simplification. First of all, when we talk about science being global, we talk a lot about STEM. We talk very little about social sciences and humanities. This is something we can see in the data, that the huge increase in co-publication, international co-publications, was dominated by the STEM fields, with relatively little increase in co-publications comparatively in social sciences and humanities. That's the first point. The other one is that when you look at the rise of global science, it's been extremely dominated by the developed world. So saying that science is global is really not respecting the fact, in a way, that a lot of countries, particularly the developing world, has not been benefiting from or been able to participate as much in this global movement of science. So I think those are two things we should bear in mind. My second point is, a lot of people talk about, when we talk about as open as possible and as closed as necessary, we should distinguish between technology readiness levels. The more basic science it is, the less the problem. So we have a pretty extensive defense industry in Sweden, and what they tell us right now with what's going on with the war in Ukraine is that they're actually applying results, research results, quite fundamental research results, before they're even published as academic papers. So I think we need to really think about how useful it is to talk about technology readiness levels and the differentiation between basic and applied research. My third point is this notion that science is value neutral, or technology is value neutral. And if I can just park that, I'll come back to that point. But I really think we also need to think about that. I would beg to differ, because as last year's Nobel Prize winner in economics, Daron Acemoglu, said, it's really how you frame technology that makes a role in how you use it. So the framing of technology drives not only the use of it, but also the development of it. And then perhaps, just to rile you up a little bit, this notion that scientists know best. I would argue scientists absolutely know best when it comes to their field. But we've heard this morning about the growing complexity of the world we're living in and the need to take context into consideration, because that's the world we're living in. And I would actually combine what Mark Walpert said with what Joachim Schellenhuber said. We need to work with the world we're in, but not lose sight of the world we want. And I think that's going to be the big challenge for us to deal with. And then, as Mark Walpert also mentioned, this notion that dual use is bad. And as somebody who was born and raised in Germany, that is something that was very hard for me to come to terms with. But I am fully on board with that now, also for historical reasons, that we cannot pretend that dual use doesn't exist, and that it is not also important as a driver of science and technology. So this is just something about the world we're living in, which I think a lot of people have talked about this morning. I would call it multipolar, anarchic, a strong man's rule, or as Robert Kaplan said, the return of the jungle grows back. Hard power seems to be the only thing that matters right now. It's utterly unstable. And most importantly, perhaps, I would say a lot of the things I just mentioned right now have to do with these disruptive technologies that we're confronting. So I've just shown a few slides. On the left, you have 3 military parades. So all of you, I think, or most of you have heard about the Draghi report that was presented last year about how Europe needs to strengthen its competitiveness and its technological strength. Since the Draghi report was presented, we've had 3 military parades. One from China, one from Russia, and one from the US. That is quite unique. That, I think, is a quite worrying, but also important reminder of the way the world is changing. The photo I have of Putin, Modi, and Xi Jinping is also something that I think maybe a few years ago we didn't think we would see in this form. And finally, the national security strategy. If we needed a wake-up call, I think we got one in Europe. And then also, just to remind you, this is something Xi Jinping said in 2018, when he said, from the mechanization of the first industrial revolution in the 18th century, blah, 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 rounds of disruptive innovation have fundamentally changed the development trajectory of human history. And this is, I think, the moment that we're in right now. And what I would like to say, because this is an EU science diplomacy conference. It's looking at a lot at Europe, but not only, and I think that's totally correct. But from a European perspective, when we agree with this statement, which I think a lot of us do, we do it with a certain amount of trepidation, right? We're saying the world is changing and it's worrying us. From other perspectives, I think from the Chinese perspective, they're seeing the same thing, but they're viewing it with optimism. So I think this is something we also need to relate to. And then also a US senator who just reiterated this point and said global technology competition is the issue of our time. So we are in a new world order, and this is a new world order that is driven by geopolitics, the decline of democracy, climate change and the Anthropocene, and perhaps underlying a lot of it, technology. Thomas Friedman in the New York Times last week spoke about what he calls the Policene, and what he means is that science and technology are interacting with politics in a way and at a speed that we have not seen before. So that's something that I think we can also sort of reflect upon. So what is actually happening? As I said, I think we have a dawn of a new era. I would recommend, it's worth reading the piece by William MacAskill, a philosopher, which he calls The Beginning of History in Foreign Affairs. It's also really worth reading the paper by the German Science and Humanities Council on international collaboration in this new era, where they talk about the crisis of the liberal rules-based post-war world order, which I think they capture very well. In this new world, technology really is a driving force for power, security, development, society, and it's shaping international relations. Technology is also about values and framing, and I really like the title of the article by Bruno Latour, a sociologist, who said, technology really is society made durable. This is back to my point about arguing that technology is value neutral. And then science is global. Particularly natural sciences and engineering have been global, but politics are increasingly national or nationalist again. And then the return of security concerns, actually war to Europe, which is something I don't think I have to talk about. I had the privilege of being one of the lead authors of the so-called Hightower report, which was the report on making recommendations on the future of the next framework program. And what we really said in that is that the period that began in the late 1980s, described as an era of unprecedented openness, or the collaborative era of science, is being replaced or at least significantly reshaped by strategic competition. And we talk a lot about competitiveness in Europe, but I would call it really, it's a strategic competition right now over ideas, over narratives, over persuasion power, as Darren Acemoglu calls it, but also over mobilization power. What does all this mean for science and technology? Again, I think I'm making the point, I hope that I'm overstating this point, but we are in a new global geography of science and technology, combined with technological disruption. And technology is just important for hard and soft power. And this really explains what a Chinese author in a recent paper called the shift from, he called it scientific globalism to scientific nationalism. And of course, implicitly, if that's what's happening, we're moving from scientific globalism to scientific nationalism, you know, this is something I think we don't talk about enough. It's the large countries who have an advantage. It's not the majority of the European countries. I think that's something we also need to really remind ourselves about, that is one of the implications. And a good friend of mine, Antti Vassara, who was just appointed Special Envoy for Technology, who was also part of the Hightower group, he said, I added science, but he said, even if technology is not interested in geopolitics, geopolitics is very interested in technology. The previous one is just a book by Jeff Ding, which talks about technology and the rise of great powers. And one of the things I think we should take with us in Europe is that what his main point, I would argue, is that it's technology diffusion and adaptation that defines a country's ability to harness the forces of technology. Sometimes we focus a little too excessively only on the development of technology. So China, it's been mentioned, its rising share. I think the real shocker right now for a lot of people, I've been studying Chinese science and technology policy for 20 years. The thing that's really traumatizing Europe right now is the rise of China in pharma. That was like the last stronghold, in a way, for Europe. They're not there where they need to be in life sciences. Now they're there. And that's something you can tell. People are shaken up in industry all over Europe. And I want to bring home this point about scientific nationalism, where Xi Jinping said in 2020, science has no national boundaries, but scientists have a motherland. So I think that also brings home that message. So what does this all mean for Europe? Technology is, I think the point I've been trying to make, is increasingly critical for Europe's future economic competitiveness, but also for security, for democracy, for power, and for agency. It's important for securing Europe's seat at the table. So when the future of AI is being discussed or decided, when the future of quantum technology is being discussed, synthetic biology, Europe has to be there technologically in order to be at the table. And discuss how these technologies should be framed, coming back about my point about the link between technologies and values. But Europe is falling behind both the US and China in technology, and this whole thing that Mark was also, we wrote a paper, I was a member also of this expert group on the social, economic and social impact of research and innovation, where we published this paper calling Rethinking Dual Use, because I really think we need to rethink it. So my take, I think I'm almost done, on EU science diplomacy is that we've gone, I just did this timeline here, we went from 2015, a mere 10 years ago, to talking about open science, open innovation, open to the world, to 2021, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. These are official EU documents. To 2024, tackling foreign interference. Again, this is not, sorry, there should be one more, which is the European framework for science diplomacy, which I want, which should be there. But then I put in green to hopefully in 2026 what I would call a smart and purpose-driven approach to international engagement. And that's just what I want to argue in perhaps the last part of this quick talk. Because what's happening right now is that I think we risk being both, and I don't like the word naive, I liked what Mark said, I think we risk both some who have lack of judgment and some who are overshooting. What I mean is that we do still have scientists who do not see the larger context, and I'm just going to state it like that. And I wouldn't call it naive because I think that's sort of insulting. But so we have those, and that is a problem. But then we also have the vast majority of European scientists who are now extremely concerned about engaging in international science with countries that seem difficult or problematic. I would also argue that I think Europe's stand right now is that we're a little bit too defensive and reactive rather than offensive and proactive. So research security is really a fundamentally defensive term, right? So I would advocate a much more offensive or proactive term, not reactive, reacting to the threats from abroad. I think Finland's priorities for international technology policy are worth looking at. This is an interesting way, a different way maybe to speak about science diplomacy. And this is just one of the slides which show, or graphs from a friend of mine, which was in the Draghi report, I think, or at least in one of the public formal EU reports, which shows that Europe is falling behind in a lot of the key technologies. So one of my last points, diplomacy and science. This is the topic of the conference. There are many ways diplomacy and science interact, but the point of my short intervention has been, right now, I think one of the key places they're interacting or overlapping is through technology. This is, and what technology means for countries or regions. And so what are the ways forward? I think we need a great more amount of self-awareness. So in Sweden, we're the first member state that ordered a Swedish version of the Draghi report because we felt like we needed a better understanding of where we stand technologically. This is the kind of self-awareness I think we need. And here I totally support what the European framework the framework document on science diplomacy said we need more science and technology literate diplomats. But we also, and I wrote a paper about that for the European Commission, need to think more about technology monitoring and policy. One of the things that hasn't been talked about enough, Mark talked about it this morning, but I think this is something we need to really talk about. Science and technology is about taking risks. And right now, we're sort of delegating that risk to individual scientists when it comes to international engagement. You can work with, for example, China, but if a problem happens, it's on you. And that is not right. That is not how we can handle this. So I think we really need to think about how we share risks in engaging with the best while protecting our assets. And that's what I mean, smart engagement, strategic and proactive. And so what I would say, what are our instruments? I've mentioned two of them: risk sharing, boosting our strengths. This is what the OECD also talks about. Strengthening the EU's position as a global leader in pooling efforts to tackle global challenges. Absolutely, we should never, I feel like, abandon that overarching objective, and embracing dual use. I hope I didn't go over my time. Thank you.
That was perfect, Sylvia. And let's have a few questions for Sylvia, if there's questions in the audience or online.
Nobody felt provoked?
Maybe I can go first, because you touched upon one thing which maybe is not that often discussed. You said tech literacy at the diplomat view.
Yeah.
I can't help think when we look at the elite in Europe, elite in US, and elite in China, it's very different background the elite actually has.
Yeah.
And maybe if we look at the executive committee in China, dominated by engineers. I'm not engineering biased, even though that myself, but does that reflect also, you can say, how we're ruled? Where are the elites actually coming from in Europe?
Absolutely, and I just want to give an example. I mean, I've worked with a few European governments, and but if I look at the Swedish ministries and governments, I really feel that we do not have enough technology competence in the foreign ministry. Mm-hmm. And it's not something we include in our training of the diplomats. You can also, as you said, I was in charge of science and technological collaboration with China for 10 years for the Swedish Government Agency for Innovation. And it really was the case that if you wanted to know where Sweden was strong, all you had to do was ask the Chinese delegations that were coming. Mm-hmm. And this is something where we're reactive.
Yeah.
And that, I think, we just cannot afford to be.
No. Yes, please. There should be a mic. I can see it's coming.
So my name is Ben Brisch with the German Academic Exchange Service. Thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. I could connect or many of the things that you said with the space diplomacy debate that we had yesterday here in the same auditorium. And there were a number during this debate yesterday and at other parts of the conference, ever and ever we heard complaints about the United States you also mentioned the security strategy, moving away from Europe, or they have big tech companies who are too powerful and can decide about the fate of other countries like Ukraine and so on. However, I was wondering, doesn't Europe need more investment in this technology? So it's not enough, in my view, to complain about what the Americans do and what others, China and others, do in the world to foster their not only sovereignty but also ability to be relevant in the world and pursue their interests. And Europe is very much in. So my question is, what can be done to invest more in technology and innovation, where surely science is involved? Without science, there will be no technology and innovation. But what would you say is necessary in Europe to achieve more in this direction? Thank you.
I mean, I completely agree. And I think I reworked my slides, and that's one of the main things I had. That's also part of being proactive, right? Invest in your strengths. And in the HITER report, that's why we called for a significant increase in the framework program. But we also talked about how member states need to step up and increase their national R&D budgets, because we're not really advancing. So absolutely, that's what I mean when I talk about if you want a seat at the table, if you want to be part of the discussion of how technology is going to be used in the future, you need to be in that technology. And one of the big things we don't do in Europe, that's the final thing I wanted to say, we need the single market, because we need to work with technology from the demand side. Right now, we can what we invest in with governments and technology is always just going to be a small part of what's really going to drive technological development. So we need more philanthropy, which is something we failed at in Europe, as raising philanthropy, the ability to invest through philanthropies. We have one of the largest private research funders in Sweden, the Wallenberg Foundations, and I think that's one of the reasons that we are where we are. So philanthropy, we need demand, working on the demand side of technology, public procurement, a single market. So I completely agree, but I think while we definitely need more money for the framework program, it's not enough.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. And I can see good questions from the audience. Some of them digs into industry. So maybe
Yes.
I'll say thank you so much for
Thank
now.
you.
Sylvia, please take a seat over here.
Thank you.
And the comment on how can governments in Europe better engage with tech industry to improve Europeans' competitiveness, I think that's probably a question that will weave into the first session of the panel discussion. So I'll turn the word over to you, François. Maybe give a 2-minute intro to yourself and how you see science diplomacy.
Yeah, your question was how science diplomacy helps business and multinationals deploy in the world, etc. I think I'd like first to make a statement here, is that industrial activity always was born in science, unlike trade. You can trade whatever you want, but industrial activities, they always were born out of science. So we at the industrial side never forget that. Now, the answer to the question is a little bit where Sylvia left it by her recommendations on the way forward, I would say, and the principles that you have laid down. It's engagement, dialogue, we talk a lot about that, but then it's about collaboration, which is really working together. 3 examples. The one is, in February of this year, a report was published by the European Commission that has assembled 150 people to think about scientific diplomacy, science and diplomacy, and came with a framework and recommendations of how you can think about it, which was really useful. But what struck me is that there was none representative of the industry and the business in that conference. That says a lot about how we think about that in the first place. Then I come to the part that where you see Europe has been putting moral principles above its own interests sometimes, and you see that happening, and we are confronted with the results of having done that for, I suppose, a number of decades. And reversing that is not an easy thing, but I guess that the conflict in Ukraine has been kind of the definitive turning point for us, because the heat is on. Also, I think the change of attitude of the US towards us has been also a turning point. Now, when it comes to science and diplomacy, I give you 2 examples of very striking things that happened in the recent past. We have here in Europe, and in the Netherlands in particular, a fantastic company called ASML, who is the leading manufacturer of chip printing devices. This is not only a Dutch company, it's a European company. You have an ecosystem of 300 companies, an academic institution collaborating for making these machines, and they spread out over the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany for the major part of it. It's a fantastic, it's our little Silicon Valley, if you would see. We have a fantastic advance in technology, and an example of diplomacy is that the diplomacy made around that company is made in Washington, not in Europe. So it is the White House who tells the Prime Minister of the Netherlands what he can export, what ASML can export to China and not. Just to give you an example of what that means. Another one, coming from China, is, as you alluded, I'm working now in telecoms. Now, one of the leading manufacturers of telecom equipment is Huawei. They equip a lot of networks around the world, not in America. That's the exception. They have been banning every Chinese manufacturer from the beginning, not in Europe. Now, Europe is again bending to American pressure to get a Chinese vendor out. And then you have 2 approaches, and I will cite you, this is just an anecdote, but it is telling of how we Europeans are absolutely unprepared for that. In Britain, the Americans approach Downing Street and they say, Prime Minister, you got to have that Chinese vendor out of your country. The British are very collaborative with business. It's one of the best examples you have in Europe. So they go to the telecom sector and said, what is the problem? How can we solve it? How deep is it? Where is it? Etc., etc. I'm not going to bore you with technical details, but we give them all things. Where the Prime Minister can push back on the Americans and say, no, we can solve the problem, this, that, and the other. And by the way, Huawei is not in your core systems. It's radio equipment. We have access to the source code for the updates. You don't have to fear the killing switch and what have you. Prime Minister says no. The Americans come back, ask for a second time. Prime Minister says no again. Third time, Americans come and said, Prime Minister, you don't understand what we want here. Huawei is out of the networks in the UK. Now, in Germany, the same collaboration between the industry and the German government led to better results. We still operate Huawei, we have boundaries, but that is just to say that when it comes to science and diplomacy, Europe, for the most part of the time, it's always in the defense mode. And so the call is we have to be much more proactive according to the principles that you just laid down, Sylvia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, François. I would really like to ask questions for this, but maybe stay with the format. So, Jens, if you give a 2-minute, maybe the challenge on pharma in China and how you see the world.
Yeah, thank you. So let me maybe put a little bit perspective because I'm working with small startup companies at the BioInnovation Institute. We are supporting scientists to make spin-out companies, typically based on academic research that sometimes goes for 10 years. And based on that idea, they're looking in to see how they can find a commercial application. They apply to us. We support them financially and also with developing business models. And in this way, we have supported now 130 companies, predominantly in life science, but more recently also in quantum. Most of these companies are founded by academic entrepreneurs. So it's the first time for them that they come in and have to learn about business models and maybe a little bit of perspective here, because if we take in life science, of course, the majority of the companies are in developing new pharmaceuticals. That's an area we heard has been a traditional stronghold in Europe. It has been a stronghold in Denmark also. We have a very strong pharmaceutical industry here. But all of these companies have been targeting one market, and that's the American market. This is beginning to change. We see investors beginning to pivot. It's tougher and tougher for the companies to advance and get investments. And as I sometimes say, we have been living also in that area in a bubble because we have been relying on the American healthcare system to finance the developing of all new pharmaceuticals. And that's going to end. Those days are over. The Americans will not accept the high pharma prices anymore. And we have to all lift. So what is the solution to this? That is, of course, that all of the startup companies will begin to look more globally, like you would normally do. And particularly if you are a startup in Denmark, you cannot rely on having a product to the Danish market because that's too small. You need to look globally. And so therefore, that means you have to begin to look at Europe. Here it becomes complicated because it's a very fragmented market. Nobody are looking at China, which is maybe also wrong, because why are they not? It's a growing market. It's going to be large. And so here we hit into these challenges that we are facing. And so there, I think many startup companies could really benefit from the diplomacy services being much, much better in actually advancing and helping on these frontiers. Now, maybe just one final comment about the general markets, because if we look outside Denmark for startups, and we have close collaboration with similar organizations in Germany, France, Italy, and so on, what is a little bit interesting is as soon as you go to some of the larger European countries, what most of the startups are focusing on are local markets. And this is so wrong again. It's naive. If you want to build businesses, you have to build businesses for the global market, and you have to really think about on a global scale on this. And of course, we heard about all the challenges there is in the technological race that we are facing and so on. I think, and I agree, we need to be more proactive and so on, but part of being more proactive is that we just need to run faster. We need to be better in taking more of our science and advance it. And here, an issue about capital was raised also. That is an issue. We do need more venture capital in Europe. We need more risk capital up front to to have the companies to advance faster. A typical strategy, and I know that from my own startup companies, is to drip-wise finance startup companies in Europe. That's completely different from the US and what we're seeing in China also now. We need to move away from this and take much more risk and bring more technologies forward. So that would be my sense on this, and we can come back and discuss some of the other challenges that there are in the field.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jens. So let me maybe pick up on where you left, Jean-François, this example from the UK. I know UK is not part of the European Commission, but maybe some perspective, because I see in one sense you're saying that Europe is on the back foot of threats that are real. So US might be right. On the other hand, we also see US playing a game of divide and conquer across Europe. So as a multi-international European based, are we on the back foot? The Americans got it right, or are we too divided and they're playing us? So can you elaborate what should be the right path forward for?
It's a very geopolitical question, yes. And
sorry.
I mean,
how could you
again? Sylvia showed a copy of the new national security policy of the White House, and I've read it attentively. It's only 32 pages, so it tells you, and one has to say. Whether America or China are quite clear in what they want to achieve. They publish it, they make it public, and they live to it. Mm-hmm. So we should not, in Europe, live in denial of what others want to do with their own position. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, we are most of the time in the reactive mode and not in the active mode. Now, I realize it is extremely difficult to go to the active mode because we have been always put on the back foot for a long time. So that is difficult to change. Now, I have to say that whether in the UK or whether in the European Union, and most of the time in collaboration, when in the reactive mode and when in the crisis mode, our governments do the right thing. Mm-hmm. I have to say that. So we should not also despair. Mm-hmm. But it's beyond having the right addressing the right reaction towards the threat, whether that is the conflict in Ukraine or it's the COVID or, that is one thing. But it's plotting a policy and a vision where we want to be in the future. That is what I think basically we still have to do a lot, i.e. publishing a paper that would be as clear as the American paper. You might not like it, that's something else. Yeah. But at least you know what they want. It's like China, they published where they wanted to be in terms of industrial dominance. I think it is 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was already in charge of a company. I read that and said, well, fast forward 20 years, they are there where they wanted to be because they worked on it. Very simple.
And you would like to see that from the European Commission and then aligned with all the 27 countries, or that dilemma? How realistic is it?
Well, yes, you know how difficult it is. We are not, that is the problem. We are not the United States. The United States is the United States. It's a nation. We are not a nation. The European continent is an amalgamation of nations that has willingly chosen to collaborate. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things is, obviously, is the rule of unanimity. Mm-hmm. It's one of the biggest taboos, but as long as you will not kind of reform that one, I think it will be difficult, certainly if you want to further enlarge the European Union, think about Balkan states as we call them. You will have to really reform also the governance of how this play out. But that is a very difficult thing because the primary democracy for our citizens in Europe is within the boundaries of their state. That's how they live it. And that's why member states do not want to give more sovereignty to something which is super sovereign. And then that comes on the background. We have to say that the European Commission, I don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater, but the last 20 years has been, we created a fantastic instrument, which is a single market. But in the last 20 years, we have been diminishing the power of the single market consistently. Now, that is in itself the theme of a whole conference. But that is the essence of the Draghi report. You have a fantastic single market. Use it as a single market and do not continue to fragment the market as you do today. these economic reforms, which are not geopolitical, which are totally in our own geopolitics between the 27 member states, that is where we have to work on in the first place.
Thank you. Jens, you mentioned investments. So where tech diplomacy or science diplomacy, what regions could that help some of these startups? Is it within Europe? Is it other places?
As I said, any startup that has ambitions of becoming a growing company have to think globally in terms of market. This we have seen, of course, in the tech space where you see this very, very rapid growth. But also, as I mentioned, for example, if you're launching a new pharmaceutical, but it goes also for other deep tech areas. And there we are also beginning to see some unfortunate things, that there are maybe beginning to be hindrance about using Chinese investors into companies. People get worried about that they will then have insight into the technology and so on. Very analogous to what we see with Huawei. And sometimes people are not understanding that if you are an investor, it doesn't mean necessarily you just have all the insight into technologies and so on. And so we are sometimes making it too hard for ourselves, I think. But maybe I think the essence of the problem is that we do have a lack of capital, of venture capital in Europe, and it's primarily because whereas we actually do have a lot of capital because we have very large pension funds in Europe, but they're predominantly investing into the US market and to some extent even the Asian market, including China. But we need to have that a higher fraction of their investments goes into venture capital, which is a good business. It's known to deliver good returns if you make these funds sufficiently large and do diversify sufficiently in the investments. We have this extreme fragmentation of venture funds in Europe. Many of them are Danish or Swedish. And here, paradoxically, many of the sovereign wealth funds in Europe is helping with this fragmentation, because the sovereign wealth funds in Europe wants to if they put money into a VC fund, they want that VC fund only invest in that country, and that is actually minimizing the return, because that prevents you from going globally in Europe. You could put a European mandate and look for the best cases. And so if you are a German fund, maybe the best cases will be in Spain or Italy and other places. So we have all these constraints that have all been set up for all good intentions, as mentioned. I mean, it's all well meant, but it's actually preventing advancement of the whole ecosystem, you can say, and for Europe to grow.
Thank you, Jens. Maybe just a reflection or some numbers. I looked at data for Chinese investments in deep tech. Around 7-8 years ago, it was 7%. Majority went into consumer electronics. Today, the number is more than 70% that goes into deep tech from China. So they are aligning those investments across China. So I think there's a really call and urgency for what you point out, Jens. So maybe if we turn to the rest of the panel. So Claudia, if we start with you. So how does these views from industry sound to you, and what's your point or take on science diplomacy? What can we do in Europe?
Thank you, first of all, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So my point of view comes sort of from a foreign ministry point of view. I'm not from industry. But what I hear here, so maybe I should explain a bit how I come to science and tech diplomacy. For me, there's a fundamental difference between science and tech diplomacy, because it's basically what has been said already by Sylvia. For me, science diplomacy is the way how we would like the world to be to look like, whereas tech diplomacy is the place to manage the place like it is. And I think in Europe we still haven't really figured out the difference, and I think that's already a problem. I can totally agree with what has been said on the fact that we are totally reactive and defensive, because the way we treat now technology is not in terms of innovation and industrial policy, IP, strategic use of standards to drive forward competitiveness, but we look at it from a very defensive economic security point of view, which is legitimate and all well, but we look at it in strategic dilemmas, and I think we are structurally unable to get out of these dilemmas. It's been already said. We, instead of looking globally, we are very much Eurocentric and we compete against each other. We have not managed to really create a unified tech and innovation ecosystem. Everything that's been said is true. Fragmentation among ourselves, no single market, lack of public procurement has been said. I think that's a key point that we are totally missing. It's crazy, basically, that if you look at Global Gateway, which is meant as an instrument to sort of drive forward the way European Union implements its international cooperation strategy with a more strategic outlook, a lot of money that goes into it is actually, say, in the West Balkans, finances Chinese infrastructure companies. And that's crazy because the very fact of why Global Gateway came into existence is to, in a way, informally, to be an answer to One Belt and One Road. And we're basically financing One Belt and One Road. So I think it's still something that bugs me that we still haven't understood the scale of the problem. And I'm worried that we don't use, because we talk about diplomacy as something that goes outside, right? The global vision. I think we need more domestic diplomacy, bringing together, industry, bringing together those who work on innovation, those who work on export controls, the diplomats all together, because we don't have a clear strategy. It's been said, we have no clue what we want. And because we still haven't figured out what this world is. We're still somewhere in the 20th century. And I think structurally, we struggle with it because the European Union, in the DNA, is built on this vision of the 20th century, but that's done. And we haven't come up with a new vision. I think diplomacy is also should be there, helping to forge, together with others, industry, civil society, academics, science community, the technical communities, governments, all coming together, forging one strategic vision. And we don't have it. Structurally, we don't have it. Because, people who talk about science diplomacy, just if you look at who works on it from a government, public servants position, in council working groups. This is a total different bubble than the ones who look into 5G, toolbox, cybersecurity, and high risk vendors. And, someone else talks about export controls. So the bubbles and silos in Europe are terrible and hinder a forward-looking approach. So that's what I mean by the European Union, the way we look at things and how we look at policy making is just not structurally not apt for the challenges ahead.
I thank you, Claudia. It almost seems like we're a little bit schizophrenic in Europe, looking at the different perspectives. So maybe we need some standardization. So I think, Pouline, a segue over to you.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me here. Yes, I come from the standardization world. I work with the European CEN and CENELEC and international ISO and IEC, where I'm also in the ISO technical board. And Belt and Road initiative was mentioned. Part of that was also an initiative on standardization. Where should China be? Traditionally, this is a system that has been there for 100 years, and Europe has been very, very strong, single big European countries. But we see since the last 10 years, China is really moving forward. And it matches the strongholds in technology and research. Right. So what we see in Europe and from the Commission, there's an ambition that Europe should also have a big influence at international level. And we have the positions and the traditions, so that should be possible. But how can we, in those areas where the Chinese are best in research, of course they're there. So we need to also get on our toes. And standards are very much about market access. If you look back in history, you can see something like electrical safety. You have norms for that, international ones. Everybody all over the globe uses that. So if you can form such a standard, you have a good access for your technology worldwide. Now it's about quantum. Everybody wants to influence the standards on quantum. And there we should be there as well. So I think it's a tool that you can use in this area of...
And Pauline, I'm curious, when you look at standards, should we use it more aggressively to promote the European industries, competitiveness, be faster, have more speed, as Jens said, translating that to yours, or are we still international, looking for what is the best technical standards, so how do you see that as a tool?
The system is trying to combine things. So it's a consensus-made technical discussion on what is the best solution. So that part is there. But of course, the more clever experts you have in writing the standards, the more they can argue the case. And often it's not. It's also about can we raise the requirements in a specific way? Can we make the tests in a way that it fits well with a certain technology? They're technology neutral, but I mean, if China is moving really fast in flying cars, that's a project they have, and they can dominate the standards, then it's good for them, right? So we should be there, and we should keep the connection between international and European standards. That's another thing right now, that if we just want to close in on Europe, we can define definitely the European standards, but then our experts don't have the time for international standardization.
Right, so we have to be careful.
Yeah.
About that, yeah. All right, Lynda, over to you. And the you could say more bottom-up initiatives we can do in science. Again, back to Jens and the speed, some of this stuff that these startups coming out of science, which industry also needs. Can we have more speed into to those programs or improve them?
So you're asking how we can get research to innovation?
Maybe you should go first. You're on this, and I can ask you a question. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, okay. So the reason I'm here today is I'm representing the COST organization. I'm the chair of the scientific committee, which was mentioned earlier. And COST basically funds research networks across Europe and also globally. So the funding's for the European partners, but if there are other global partners, they're more than willing to join in the network, basically to do science diplomacy on very many different topics. So there's, I don't know, about 40 or so cost actions running per year, each for 4 years. So there's, more than 200 actions running at the moment. Now that's great. There's lots of research going on there. And then some of the partners in these networks are companies. And then you get this very good two-way discussion. What does industry need? And how can research benefit that industry? And then the great thing about these networks is that they're already there. So that if ideas are coming out of these scientific networks, they can be taken across the whole of the cost action, the people that know each other. They've developed trust over these years and know where to find each other, which is a real asset. I've worked in a couple of startups in my life, and when I was based in Edinburgh, our company was trying to pretend to be American because we were in the software industry, and we knew if we didn't look American, no one would buy any of our stuff in the States. So we had one guy sitting in Seattle showing that we were American. So this type of global network is extremely important. And I think the other thing I wanted to say just now is that innovation doesn't happen just like that. So there's not some amazing researcher who has this amazing idea and then tomorrow the product is on the streets. It takes a long, long time. I don't know how many of you in the room have an Android telephone. It's based on the Android operating system, which is a pretty neat operating system. We now have I can't do this in English anymore, 4 billion users on the planet with Android. This operating system was developed in 1969. So that was more than 50 years ago. So this, again, the AI boom was a long time ago, but we only got some tech development to allow us to then have all these huge centers. So the point being that if you want to take a scientific idea and bring it to the market, the people developing the idea have to know that they have an innovative idea and they have to get access to the training and information to help them take it the next step. So again, in the cost organization, we have the innovation grants. And there, a number of people put together a proposal. And when they get the funding, which is about 100,000 euros, a bit more than that for the year, they're asked to develop a business plan. And again, researchers don't know how to develop business plans. That's not why we're trained. So it's really a sort of, you have this huge network of these ideas bubbling up, and you have to grab a good idea, give people the resources to work on it, and then make sure they know how to access the next stages of support from the whole traveling from a research idea to a company.
Thank you. So maybe asking industry, how does that sound to you, Jens? I initially said, do we have enough momentum? Do we educate the right way in science for Europe? Do we support so you have the right startups in your place?
Yeah, so we tend maybe to look at this future a little bit negative, because there's going to be a lot of changes, and I think Jean-François was really good. It's pretty clear what the Chinese want. It's now becoming pretty clear what the Americans want. We need to figure out what do we want, and if we want to sustain the European, you could say, the general welfare model, we need to get our act together. We talked about different mechanisms that we need to have more innovation, we need to have more financing and so on. But we have all the components to do that. That, I think, is the most important thing. We have excellent science in Europe. Definitely there's more, there can be done more, but the science level in Europe is really high. We do have the capital. Right now it's not deployed in Europe, but that can be done to change. We have a lot of very strong industries, which is also quite important. There was talked about also the difference between industry and trade, but we have an amazing organizations that is very good at trade in Europe. That has been a traditional stronghold, so that is something that we can also rely on. So we have a lot of the components that are there, and I think that is what we should focus on. We will, of course, have to begin to have a strategy for getting our act together. We have maybe tended to, as I said, to outsource certain things, outsource production to China, outsource selling of pharmaceuticals to the Americans, and maybe also defense to the Americans. I mean, we need to begin to take action on all these things ourselves. That can unleash a lot of innovation and new startups and so on, and hereby leverage on that fantastic science base we have in Europe. So I'm in that sense quite optimistic, but we do need to get our act together, of course. We may have to look at some of the sacrifices on our welfare system. We do have extremely long vacations in Europe compared with the Americans and the Chinese. And we normally praise ourselves that we are very efficient and have high productivity and so on, but it's still very expensive. We talked a little about it earlier. It's still a high cost society that we are running in Europe. We may have to look at that. People will not like that. There was a question also about populism. That is maybe one of the biggest threats that we are facing, I think, in these transformations, because many people will not like it. But at least we need to put forward what are the options and a path forward, and then work towards that. So yes, I am overall optimistic. Will we succeed? We'll have to see. But I think there is the capabilities in Europe to do it.
All right. Maybe I'd like to shift focus compared to, we talked a lot about Europe, obviously, China as a challenge, US as ahead of us. Yesterday we heard about Africa. We also see some changes in demographics in Europe. China faces the same. Then we see a huge amount of talent in Africa. We used to have an approach in science, thinking our values would be spread. I can tell coming into this session, I talked to one of the top researchers in Denmark. She said, I'm getting turned down when I'm applying for research grant with scholars in Africa. Are we slow to realize also that there's allies, there's new ways to working with Africa, because the Chinese have figured it out. They're investing heavily there. Jean-François, I know you've lived more than 7 years in Africa, so maybe what could science diplomacy do to friends and maybe future alliances in Africa?
Yes, the answer was already in your question.
Okay.
Your preamble. I think Africa and the Middle East are our neighbors. And I was calling the anecdote that it's a year ago now, that I met with Prime Minister Maloney. And she showed me a map of Africa with two colored transparents that she overlaid over the map. One was in red, China, the other one in blue, Russia. And the whole territory was covered. And she told me, you see, that's the problem. We are not active, and all these people come to us. That is the bare reality. That's what we have to face. Yeah. Yet they are our neighbors.
Right.
So I think when it comes specifically, it comes to two things. It is a political will, but it is difficult because it requires two things. On the one hand, for business to invest more in Africa, it's a more risky business. And we have also put enormous regulatory hurdles based on moral demands on business that are difficult to match in that part of the world, in many parts of the world, where then Europe makes itself constrained. That's one. And the second thing, when it comes to scientific diplomacy, I think it's essentially education. One of our participants was telling me, how much Burundi's students were receiving grants to study in Beijing. Now that's exactly what. You know what the Germans did a long time ago? They financed their aid to China was aid to the technical schools. The basic technical schools. All the technician engineers have been trained with German methods and German machinery. So fast forward 20 years, when they started to build their industry, they did it with German equipment in the first place. Now the Chinese are doing exactly the same with Africa. Make no mistake. Now we can do the same. Why are we not doing it? They are our neighbors. One of the big problems is the immigration coming from the south. You will not stop it. You can do whatever you want. You will not be able to stop. People walk. And so I think you have to make sure that you create partnerships with our South. It's not the global South, it's our South. And that we have more economic and cultural ties with them. And I think they're in the scientific development where they have the biggest need. That is something we should speed up. Mind you, we speak about Africa. You cannot stop me when I start with Africa, but there are several Africas. So, you can't compare the RDC, as I saw a map in the previous session here, with Kenya. If you go in Kenya, is far more advanced a country, also in the education of its general population than the RDC. So make no mistakes, there is a lot of diversity in Africa. You have to watch out. It's not Africa, it's countries in Africa. But we have to build more bridges, and also to the educational parts and partnerships, and making sure that these people look up to Europe if they want to develop, and not to the US or to China. It's entirely in our hands.
So the call, I heard you for saying make a European strategy, announce it. Obviously tech matters for that, but I do think it calls also beyond that, the social science, the humanities, and diplomacy, and that. So maybe some comments on that.
So in the past, one of my roles was looking for collaboration with the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Automation, and my organization, and the French INRIA research organization in Europe. And through that collaboration, I was talking to people who knew a lot more about China than I did. And my field is computer science, and in the broad sense of computer science, the United States, if you like, was the birthplace. And we have Silicon Valley, it's still there. So the computer science departments in the United States had the most excellent research, and they took it to innovation and made a lot of money, as we can all see these days. The great thing about Europe is that we've always had very good computer scientists who really think about stuff. There wasn't as much research money, so there wasn't as much hardware, so they really thought about what they were doing. And in the last, 40 or so years, you have this sort of, arrogance is the best word I've got for it, that the Chinese, they just copy what we're doing. And what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that many of the Chinese PhD students on the Chinese scholarships have come to Europe and to the United States, and they've not only learnt the technical ways of doing things, but they've learned the cultural ways of doing things. So in the American and European society, you criticize everyone all the time in research. If you don't like criticism, don't become a researcher. Because the whole point is to get the best ideas, polish them, and move forward. And all these younger generation have now gone back to China because China has a lot of research money. They've pulled back senior researchers, they're pulling back the junior researchers. They understand that if you want to be competitive in research, you have to criticize each other. Okay, that culture isn't fully embedded yet, but it's getting there. So I think at the moment we're going, oh, AI, innovation, innovation. The AI came from ideas from America, Canada, United States. But the new ideas, where are they going to come from? I think that's the real question.
All right. Sylvia, I'd like to invite you to the discussion also, or maybe some reflection what you picked up here from the other panelists.
Well, you know, I think, first of all, I have this one. Right. Should I use this one? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. First of all, I agree very strongly with what you said, Claudia, and also some of the things that said before, that I think we're not totally clear about what we want. And my concern right now is that I don't think we should overthink science diplomacy. It's just like Mark said, you know, it's really what's the goal? And I think the goal is that Europe needs to learn from the best, be relevant in strategic markets and contexts, and protect and boost its assets. And then you start from there, and then you need to figure out what does foreign policy need to do to make sure that that can happen. And the other way of looking at it is that I think we're struggling right now with grasping the fact that the world is so complex and that we need to consider context. But if we finally understand that it's more complex and we need context, then we just have to build capacity and policy coherence around it. So I think that's why I'm feeling like focus on what we want to achieve. I would also argue, I think China is really challenging so many of our fundamental assumptions, including the speed of innovation. This is one of the things that Swedish CEOs tell me all the time, is that they had no idea how fast you could innovate. Do you know what I mean? We thought innovation had to take a long time. Actually, it doesn't have to take nearly half as long as we think it does. So I think these are the kind of things, and that's what I mean, learn from the best, and the best are not the people we always think they are. So, and then I saw this question, if I just may, like, you know, how can you make sure that scientists can engage with the best research, even if it is in China, or the best innovation environment? That's the thing about helping scientists with context. You know, I was deputy president of the largest research university in Sweden, and I found it just baffling how, you know, every single discipline and every single scientist was viewing China only through their own lens. You know, it's like the physics professor saw China through the lens of physics, you know, and the social scientist saw it through the lens of social science. And you know, being by definition a knowledge organization, we need to put those perspectives together and then figure out how we're going to tackle it. So I think it shouldn't, that's what I mean. I feel like let's not overthink science diplomacy, and I also agree with you. And for me right now, tech is the issue. Like you said, we're not bad in science in Europe. We're really, actually, in the Hydro report, we do really well. Where we don't do well is in using it. And we're not doing well in the private sector. Expenditure and R&D. So I think we have a pretty clear diagnostic, and we don't have to make complicated processes. Let's just focus on, and I think standards are super important, and somebody asked here, we are not where we used to be at all where we need to be in standards. Standards are so important. It has to do also with values. I mean, in Sweden we have a zero vision, you know, that we want no traffic related deaths. That's one of the visions we adopted in Sweden. In a way, that's a standard, right? And then we said, we're going to work according to that. That set the value of how we develop technology. So I think standards, and in a wider field, what we mean by standards, it's framing technology. And that is something we've just sort of lost the, you know, we sort of stopped paying attention.
Okay, I can see Jens have a comment for that.
Oh yeah, no, I agree on everything said there. But again, also I'd like to come also back to what Jean-François said about this with moral issues that we sometimes have in terms of negotiating or trading with other organizations, and that puts some constraints. And to some extent, we have binned China completely in that box. You know, many places, many universities are being told, don't take Chinese students because they'll steal all the technology and so on. And in certain areas, you can take plant biology. If you don't take Chinese students, you simply just don't get the best students anymore. And so we are beginning to put some blocks to certain areas where we are not as strong anymore. And so this is so we need to be more segmented into this. And yes, there may be certain areas where we need to be more careful about who we are collaborating with in developing that science and technology. But I think there is an overreaction to a large extent today, who we can trade with and you know, who we can collaborate with and so on. And we need to rethink that and be a little bit more realistic that we are not, we are good, but we cannot develop many of these things alone, and we cannot just only sell to ourselves. We need to trade with others, and there we need to rethink some of the models that we have been using for a number of years, where we could set high moral standards and we would only trade with people that was thinking exactly like us and so on.
All right, thank you, Jens. So let's trust the world more and not get too paranoid of what you're saying. We benefit from that. So let's have questions from the audience. We've had some from the online. Yeah, please. And if we can help with a microphone. Yeah, front row here, or almost front.
Well, actually, I have more a comment, or a few comments rather than questions. Because, well, also there were references to what the EU and the Commission is doing, so I also feel a bit obliged to react. But now, as I'm leaving the Commission very soon, I can, I think, be more open than otherwise, also in my reactions. But first of all, as economist by training, I immensely enjoyed the panel discussion. Well, first Sylvia's excellent presentation, and also the discussion in the panel. First, a couple of comments on the proactive approach as compared to the defensive, reactive approach, and I think this also resonates what Enrico Letta yesterday mentioned, that we really need to be more anticipatory. Yeah. Actually reacting, well, actually acting at the stage when we anticipate things happen, not reactively then only starting to regulate or thinking how the EU should react to certain developments. What I'd like to highlight, actually, because now it also connected with the previous the plenary session, is namely that what we sometimes forget when we speak about now, we speak more about research security, but it's part of our economic security. But in our economic security, you actually do have 3 pillars: promote, partner, and protect. But in my view, we are focusing too much on the protection and not enough on the promotion as well as partnering. Our framework program is, as a whole, the major tool for promotion, because we invest in research and innovation, and via that we actually invest in our competitiveness, we invest in our economic security as well. Looking forward, I believe that also a European Competitiveness Fund would be a major tool also for the promotional side. On the partnering side, first, our association agreements with our neighbors, but also the global partners, is the best promotional and partnering tool as well. So I'd really like to highlight that. Now, before joining DG RTD, I was working in DG Trade for 12 years. When I joined DG Trade back in 2006, then our reaction to the realization that in the WTO Doha negotiations will probably be a dead end, so they were. But what we did was that we started our bilateral trade agreements, FTAs, with all important partners in the world. well, Mercosur was actually started before that. We are not there yet. I very much hope that now our offensive interests will prevail our defensive interests. Because very often we kill our FTAs because of defensive interest of agriculture and not keeping in mind our major offensive interest in the industries, in the industrial side. So I hope this will not happen. But my DG, my former DG, is now called also DG Trade and Economic Security. Also much to focus on the really the protection side. Just a comment also on the startups, because I also enjoyed that part. And I very much hope that now our European Scale-Up Fund would actually be a very important tool to bring together venture capital, actually the capital which is available in Europe and which haven't been able to use. And also that the European Innovation Act will also tackle still important barriers which exist in order not to scale up in Europe, but look for other countries. I'm just mentioning because there was also a mentioning of procurement. In innovation procurement, we have only 10%, whereas America has more than 50%. This is something that we need to change as well. Many thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have time for one more question, please. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Lucian is my name. I have been in this group for the strategy, in the subgroup on the definition. And I can assure you one of the first discussion was, why don't we have business people here? And without, let's keep the Chatham House rule, the reaction was, oh no, we don't want science, business Europe, and they're too strong in articulating their voice. Second reaction was, but tech diplomacy is something else, is what Elon Musk is doing. And then we try to figure out how analytically to differentiate science diplomacy from the rest. And basically the simple message is who draws the shots. In tech diplomacy, it's not the scientists, it's the tech companies. In space diplomacy, it's the space actors and so on. So just for you to understand, there was no aggressive feeling towards that. I want to just ask whoever wants to respond. What we have noticed in this process of definition and sharpening the focus of European science diplomacy, and by the way, we didn't actually answer the question of the panel, how this contributes to competitiveness, which is the magic word today in Brussels, defense and competitiveness. Question, we have the feeling sometimes that the relationship between basic research, applied research, and innovation is not one that is based on mutual interests. That somehow the business side has more advantages than the science side. How can we, in terms of what Enrico Letta said, not end up in academic debates? How can we move things forward? Because the silo, Claudia, what has said, the silo thing is dominating not just the science policy, not just the science diplomacy, but also the economic policy in Europe. Let's be honest to ourselves. Let's be really honest. And also the lobby, the advertising for our interest is very fragmented. You have the chemical industry, the AI people who I think have like 10 lobby associations in Brussels. So how can we overcome that in real terms? Not just have academic discussions, because it's obvious that the Chinese are doing it better and the US are doing it better. And by the way, the Russians are having their own science diplomacy strategy, and some African countries, India, Brazil as well. So I would be very interesting for a very short comment. I know we are late. Thanks.
We are running late, but thank you so much for the honesty and very insightful two reflections. So I think to wrap up here, let's give each of the panelists 30 seconds, 1 minute. If you should launch, let's start with Lydia. If you had the power to launch one science diplomacy initiative, each of you, what would that be? So, Lydia, tough question.
I'll answer very quickly, and also hoping to discuss. I wouldn't call it a science diplomacy initiative. If I were to launch a science diplomacy, is that what you're asking? If I were to launch
what should it be?
Yeah, but first of all, I wouldn't call it a science diplomacy initiative.
Okay.
I would call it something else. I mean, it's like I said, it's the purpose of what we're trying to do is not achieve science. You know what I mean? What is our overall goal? I think we need to focus on. And just really quickly, I think what you said summarizes the problem in Europe. I mean, I spent 10 years at the Innovation Agency in Sweden. I just want to say scientists are not the best at understanding what their technology or their science will be used for. For that, they often need a context. And that's when somebody else was asking, how can we help scientists? I think we need to bring, MIT has a really good approach. We need to really think collectively about, if we think this is an important thing to collaborate on with China, let's come together and think about how do we frame it? How do we frame it so we don't lose out? And so, both sides gain. I don't think it's harder than that. And for that, you sometimes need you need like the government, and sometimes you need the rector to assume responsibility. But I could say a lot more. So that's what I would do, focus on the outcome.
All right, thank you, Lydia. Lynda?
I'd like to see Europe creating and supporting more startups from the results from science, and we have to somehow educate the academics that they don't know everything, and that they need to seek other parties to help them with entrepreneurship, business plans, who you get to startups, scale-ups, things like that. So I'd like to see a lot more knowledge and innovation that finds its way to the right people at the right part of the academic network.
Thank you.
I think there are two things. Something like a multi-stakeholder European Forum on Technology and Innovation that brings together all the stakeholders, trying to forge sort of one vision ahead. And the second thing is something that Sylvia alluded to, this translation from lab to market, if you like. We need I think a European Commission, which has great strengths, is just not the kind of agency that will do that translation work, because they have no clue how industry works. But we need to sort of support our startups to scale, but also our broader industry sectors to adopt innovation in that sense, adopt deep tech from startups. And there we need some sort of a structure that brings all these things together. As I said, overcoming the silos and trying to bring the ecosystem together. And the ecosystem is really broad. And the complexity, I think we need that kind of silo over avoiding multi-stakeholder approach.
All right, thank you. Pouline?
Thank you. I think it's important to define what we want, but also in specific areas and there, I would of course like that the tool of standards could also be used more, and maybe the first step would be for people to know about it, be it initiatives through representations. A pilot could be some training for people involved to actually know about what would be the benefits and what to do if you want to use that tool. Yeah.
Thank you. Jens?
Yeah, I actually agree very much what has been said already, but I maybe just want to give one reference to also the question or comment about, because I really don't like the term basic and applied science. I think it makes no sense. Universities do science. Much of it can find application, also what we traditionally will call basic science. So I think we should get away from talking about those terms. But maybe one thing that follow up from what was mentioned here, I think all universities in Europe needs to be better to make a strategy for what they want to be. All of the universities try to be good at everything, and that's completely nonsense, because they are really poor at many things, but they are really good at certain things, and they need to be better in selecting and focusing on that. And I can say that after I've been in the university sector for more than 25 years, the universities hate to make priorities, but they need to be better in that, because that's how we create better universities, and then through collaboration across Europe, they can complement each other, and thereby we can cover all the areas that we need to cover. But right now, we are moving too much towards the common lower standard.
Thank you, Jens. Jean-François, you will have to...
Difficult to speak as last, but 3 things. we don't want as Europeans to lose our welfare states, broadly defined. Secondly, we have a demographic dip, which is a real challenge. Thirdly, we have an immigration influx, which we cannot digest. And fourthly, we have a conflict with Russia. Now, those are 4 big challenges. And we have to look for solutions. But if we want to have a way out, we need economic activity to thrive. You cannot divide a pie if the pie is shrinking. So we have to make the pie growing. So economic growth for us is just a prerequisite if we want. It's at the sheer, our existence depends from that. We have no other solution. Now, and you have to start then from your strength. And the first strength is our education system. We still have a very good education system, which at the top of the pyramid still translate in excellent science, in terms of what we produce in science. That you have to translate in economic wealth. I think that is essentially what you need to do. We have a fantastic tool. It's a single market that we have been constraining over the last 20 years. We have, again, to develop that single market. We have to develop our first and foremost economic relationship in the world with outside Europe is with America. I mean, the transatlantic relation, both in terms of trade and mutual foreign direct investment, is the widest it is. We can't ignore it, and it won't disappear. So we should be cognizant of, despite all the rhetoric of the White House, this thing still is standing. But we have to develop more with other parts of the world, call it the Global South. It is an opportunity absolutely for Europe, and we should go into that direction much more forcefully. And then last and not least, we have to put faith, means, and I was not saying subsidies, but the right incentives for those sectors where we excel. Don't start to complain about where you're weak. Saying that we are not very good in large language models and that the Americans are in front of us, yes, that's it. Don't even try. But use their technology and apply it to industrial use, to life science, for instance, and develop your strengths in that. We still have formidable strength in life science. In the digital network, I was alluding to ASML. It is a fantastic, there is no chip printing without ASML. It's a European company. Talk me about diplomatic science. We have a tool in hand. And finally, we also have to invest in our defense. We know that. Dual use should not be a dirty word. And, we are the childs of the consequences of World War II. And we most probably have to reinvent ourselves in that field. But we have to look at it with determination and optimism and not just, moaning and complaining about how difficult it is.
All right, thank you so much, François, and the whole panel. I think built on our strength, protect Europe and develop Europe. I think we all agree to that. I have to take, I think, the quote of the day when you said, François, that industrial strength are born out of science. I think it sums it quite well. We have excellent science. We do have the businesses, so maybe over to the literacy. We need tech literacy in our leadership, but we also need the business and sciences to come together and set a direction for Europe. So with that, thank you so much for this panel discussion here. We're all open for talks over lunch, so thank you all.